There we go. So I think we often run into a persistent bias in that the folks who participate in projects tend to be intellectually interested. They are frequently members of the university community, not always, but they do tend to be from a sort of, I hesitate to say higher income bracket, but I hope y'all know what I mean, and I really hope I'm not committing a stereotype that I should not be. And so I think we want to ensure that we benefit not only those people, but people who are not from that demographic, who we frequently don't, that they tend to not be our participants. And when it comes to our field experiments, the big field experiment that is going to make us crazy starting in about a year, I don't want to be asking that question anymore. I don't want to be asking, like, are these people really representative? And I think it happens a lot that we engage people who are accessible to us through our usual channels. And so then we don't know how to do anything else. So those are the people that we end up studying and measuring their homes. And, you know, maybe they are representative and maybe they are not, but we don't really have any proof. So I guess I'd just like to have a brainstorming discussion about how we could be reaching more people. And maybe for me, two big questions. One, is it the channels we're going through, right? Is it just Epic Homes people we're already of a certain interest group? And then two, is there something about the nature of what we do that means that some people are just not going to participate or not be interested or feel like it's not for them? And I don't actually have a structure for this engagement, but I need the whole team to help us do better. So perhaps, well, if you have any thoughts, then please bring them forward. And then I have a couple of other questions, but I don't want to be talking all the time.
This isn't really anything to add, but I had a question. Ellison, how were the homes originally collected for the Epic Homes study? Just trying to think of how we typically do it. I'm not familiar.
Because that was a partnership with City of Fort Collins, we developed advertising material that was verbally delivered through contractors that were within the contractor network that Fort Collins sort of approves if they want that approval. So meaning if contractors want to be on a list of approved contractors that streamline the process, they can go through some certification and agree to some terms and then be on that list. And that's primarily who we disseminated materials with. And then we also used advertising channels, mailers, web, and email that is already part of already part of the advertising for the Efficiency Works Homes program. And then the last piece is we developed a script for PRPA, which is the Platte River Power Authority, to share about our project when they got calls from people that wanted to do energy efficiency audits. And so I guess maybe this is to a point that I would make later. It was actually I would say a pretty comprehensive, not representative of all homes in Fort Collins, but covered a lot of advertising channels, and leads me to a position right now where I'm like, we could spend a lot of time trying to recruit additional, what we consider hard to reach groups. And I am probably less incentivized to do that sort of effort and instead lean in on who does respond. and understand who they're representative of, even if it's not, quote unquote, every possible type of home or household. But that, hopefully that answers your question, Dom.
Yeah, thank you.
Makes me think of a few things. I think that makes sense, right? Like we're only doing 16 houses, so there's no way that we're going to get a representative sample. So just understanding who we have and trying to extrapolate out of there is good. I'm not sure how many people went to, I don't think I recognized anyone in the audience. A couple weeks ago, Greg Welch from Florida came to campus and he was talking about his VR research accelerator, where basically, right, the point is this problem isn't novel to us, right? People are trying to tackle this in every single domain. And he got several millions of dollars from NSF to try to create this decentralized VR system across the world where anyone who's doing research in virtual reality can put it to this server, and then anyone who owns a VR headset or goes to a library with a VR headset around the world can opt into the study and get paid, right? And that's a good way to get more representation, which obviously is outside of the scope of this, but I think it just goes to show that NSF is funding millions of dollars to try to figure out how to get more representative samples. So we shouldn't perhaps beat ourselves up too much if our 16 houses aren't completely heterogeneous.
Yeah, we talked about this before in a different way, right? And with regard to the Epic homes and their size, and I was comfortable with what we came out of, like, okay, for Epic homes, we're just going to take these homes, they're not representative anyway, and we're going to learn what we can learn, and that is fine. But the statement of the proposal is that we are developing technology and possible other interventions, including behavioral components for people who are, say, weatherization eligible, which is defined as 200% of poverty line. Somebody can correct me on that. So we can say that we are exploring homes, and we could perhaps make arguments that a home is a home and doesn't matter, right? But if it has not been tested in the demographic that we are seeking, then I think I have more questions about that than about the Epic homes. Because I think Epic homes is just exploration of physical principles. So, okay. But when we start getting into the integration, it may matter.
So a couple thoughts come to mind for me. I understand what you're saying there, especially from the response piece. In the proposal, we said our houses would not be representative of our targets, that we'd be in likely researchers' homes. And so while I very much appreciate the desire to be inclusive and the goal for us to as fully understand as possible how different populations might work with this type of technology, it's not very high on my priority list compared to the other things that we need to test on the system, just to be very frank. While I think it's really important from the survey side of things to have a really broad idea, I agree with, I think, what kind of Erica was saying. At 16 homes, no matter what population we get, it's not going to be representative of anything. It's just a snapshot. So I'm not sure. For me, I see a lot of value of sinking a lot of effort in identifying ways to get to those other homes in this particular study, when the population size that we're going to be, or the sample size we're measuring, is so small anyway. So opportunistic homes of a general size that we're interested in seems like a win, a sufficient win to me.
Tammy, let me ask a question here. You're
Yeah.
talking about getting to the bigger demographics, right? The larger study?
Sorry, can you restate your question? Because I'm not sure I'm gonna,
Aren't you talking about reaching out past the 16 homes to a greater cross-section of people in conducting your study?
at this time, no, I'm not
Oh,
talking.
you're only talking about the 16 homes? Oh,
We're
okay.
talking about the 16 homes in the field study, which is coming up. Not what we're doing now in Epic Homes. We're gonna be hard pressed to manage those 16 homes, so we are not going to do any more than that. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of data, and a lot of things have to work at the same time, including the diagnostic measurements, Christian's implementation, and whatever the communication team decides to do with regard to measuring people's responses. I just want to push back a little bit on this. And Christian, this is not to disrespect your priorities, because you have a huge job, and I can see why that would take precedence. I observe that inclusion is often something people do last. And in doing so, they may be neglecting some of the things that kept people from being included in the first place. And in the event that those are important to how things work or how technology is accepted, we could be missing a boat and contributing to practices of exclusion. And I just want to be careful about that. It's a very understandable reaction is frequently something like, well, this is what we got. Can't do anything else. Or it's already hard, which is not wrong. And yet, what we see is that continually making those choices has led to, I don't want to say segregation, but maybe layers within who can access certain things. And I don't want to continue that. I want to try, right? And sometimes I think you have to center it in order to try.
I appreciate that, Tammy. And I think where I'm coming from is I would not give up the things we said we would do for doing something we didn't say we would do. And so if we're able to do that, not at the cost of what we said we were going to do, I'm all for it, 100% supportive. But I wouldn't, if push came to shove and we only had limited resources and time, I would do what, for me personally, do what we said we were going to do before sinking effort into these other places. I think it's a fair question about should we have said we were going to do something different, prioritized a different place, and all of those battles of, well, would we have gotten funded, and all those are fair too. But I fear doing too many things poorly as opposed to a few things well.
I think that's fair. Your emphasis on delivery, I think, is a really important asset for this project. Lori?
The reason I was asking the questions was because I didn't know how much effort you wanted to put in the outreach effort. And forgive me, I don't know all your programs and everything out there. So I was thinking if you wanted to reach different demographic, you could advertise or make connections with county programs. And of course, I don't know how many of these have been, the contacts you have gone through the weatherization agencies, of course. And then also appealing, and this, you may not think this is worth the time or effort, contacting somebody who's prominent in one of these underserved communities. Somebody like a minister or a community leader, and telling them about the program and seeing if they can reach out and speak to groups of people about this opportunity, sort of a grassroots advertisement from somebody who's trusted. So those were just some suggestions on how you could perhaps reach the demographic that you feel might be missing here.
Thank you, Lori.
I have some ideas.
I would love to hear them.
Okay. I'm thinking more like Northern Fort Collins has a big, heavy like Latino Hispanic population. And this is just like an event that I was invited to this weekend. But there's one called Luchando por Nuestras Familias, and it's a Fort Collins like family like based organization. And then you have Isaac, which is just ISAAC. And then apart from that, I was thinking like the Poudre Public Libraries and any churches around Fort Collins, just to kind of like get the word out there. It might not be the most like scientifically based, but I think it is where like a lot of people do like congregate.
Do you think, Karia, because you seem to know these organizations, do you feel like it's something they'd be receptive to? And so I don't want to assume that everybody's interested in this, but do you think that they'd be interested?
I want to say yes, because there's people who just like organize them. I volunteered with some of those organizations before for like community events, especially during like tax season, or like the event this one is like for business and like legal assistance. So it is a lot of like events and or like communal organization around like supporting the families. And I think if it comes from like say like, hey, like because they do kind of look to CSU students to volunteer for these events, if we kind of give them the pitch and being like, a lot of CSU staff and students are working on this project, would you all be interested in like participating? And then talking to them about confidentiality, because I do know that for some of these communities, they worry about their information, especially maybe some like some legal statuses being shared once you say that it is a national research.
That's totally fair. I'd like to follow up with you about that later, but I'm interested in hearing more. Will?
Yeah, going off of actually what Kari was talking about, and I've been actually thinking about this since we started this, but I was thinking about using, I don't know what we can and can't do for this. There's limitations to how we get people to participate in our projects, but through the CDPHE project, we've been to 2, maybe 3 like daycare centers and schools around Fort Collins. And the reason I've been thinking about them is there's, I feel like there might be not a large, but like a pretty good like mix of families whose children are at these places. And these are places that at least have kind of seen some of the work that CSU that we're doing in indoor air quality. Even if they haven't seen our equipment or kind of seen what we're doing, people talk, word gets around like, oh yeah, the CSU, they've been doing like this indoor air quality research project where my child, goes and things like that. So what I mean by going off of what Kari is saying is like, these are places where they can kind of already see kind of what we're doing. And I like to think that we have left a pretty good impression, or at least had like a good showing of ourselves, and at least what we're doing with the CDPHE project at those places. So I was thinking at least 2 or 3 places in Fort Collins where we could kind of say, hey, we're also, doing this if you're interested, and that could be a way to kind of get some different homes or whatever, at least different from what we've been doing so far that carried over from the Epic Homes project.
Thank you. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, the CDPHE project building the goodwill. I think that's a That's an interesting point, and it's something that's always emphasized, right? Is you have to build trust, and that's very difficult when you have a project that's typically short term. So you just have to keep being around. Let me raise another wrinkle. So this is going to be hard. This is why I'm starting to talk about it now, because this is going to be a tough field project. We're just brace yourself, right? We probably can't do this in Fort Collins. And the reason is that we are seeking an environment where we're going to have frequent air pollution events. And what we had proposed in the project is maybe let's try to find a place that has inversions. Because, and just looking at the outdoor particulate matter data that we're getting in Epic Homes, I'm not seeing that many events. And so the project is going to be 16 weeks. It's going to be 2 weeks in different configurations. And so we can't afford to wait 2 weeks for some plume to come through. We want to see several of those events. So we were hoping, valley smoke kind of thing that is continuous. And so I'm not sure that Fort Collins is going to provide that many opportunities. So in addition to maybe having slightly not the right homes, we're also seeking a place that has particular meteorological features. So then getting back to Karya, what you said about CSU's presence, we're maybe best in Fort Collins. I don't know if there's a way to capitalize on that somewhere else. But yeah, it's kind of hard. But I heard a number of good ideas, right? So beginning to talk to community organizations now. This is why I'm raising this now. It's going to take us a while. If we had to do this project next week, we couldn't, even if we were ready with the technology. Daycare centers and schools, then we know people tend to be concerned about their children's health, even if they're not necessarily concerned, or even if they don't give attention to their own. So that may be an in. Maybe talking to CDPHE, and then Karya, when you were talking, something that came up is I know the city of Fort Collins has this environmental justice work, and Taylor, you're in touch with Milena, who's on that. So I don't know if that's another way. I think Fort Collins struggled for quite a while to get the Latina population engaged in their air quality work, and I think they're making some headway now. But it was only when they started giving attention to environmental justice that they were able to, they had to put that on the table before it started happening. And that's a little bit why I'm pushing back. It's because I know if it's a thing that's nice to do and it's always nice to do, then it never gets done.
So one idea that comes to mind there is I'm pretty sure the San Luis Valley has a lot of temperature inversions. For a different project proposal, we mined some of the data, so I can go back and see if that really does seem to be the case. But at least this is a community that we might have some people to start being able to talk to with Adams State.
Right, and for those of you who don't know, CSU Mechanical Engineering has developed a relationship with Adams State in the San Luis Valley in Alamosa. And so CSU is granting mechanical engineering degrees through or down there without students having to leave the valley.
And the CU Anschutz School of Public Health folks have a bunch of campaigns going on down there that involve surveys. So Kathy, somebody who I'm blanking on her last name right now, which I forgot about, is already distributing surveys as part of a bunch of other things. So at least there'd be
Kathy James.
somebody start. Yes,
Sorry.
kind of James, thank you.
Okay, yeah, so Will, your connection in CDPHE, it seems like we should possibly, Christian, I know you've got a few other things going on, but maybe we should screen for where the right meteorology is, and then put a second layer of screening on top of that for where we might be able to develop connections in the ways that have been being talked about. And then I think, Lori, something you brought up is that we haven't really gotten rolling with the weatherization work yet and with the surveys. And it could be that we develop more relationships and learn about more connections through that work as well.
Yes, I think, anywhere that you go, there should be county agencies that should provide different kind of support services, and might be a good venue to advertise, make some connections that way, especially health organizations. There should be county health organizations in many states. I know I was looking at them here in Illinois just to try and get our HHE program up and running. So there seems to be a lot of organizations to go through. It was hard to figure out which one to start with. So I'm hoping that's the quote unquote problem that you'll have with this, is that there'll be a number of organizations.
Yeah.
There could also be some connections through extension across Colorado. I mean, we did a study where you can get interns, CSU interns that work with extension agents in different counties and do small projects in the summer. And so we had a student who worked with, I can't remember which county agent it was, but it was more in the southern part of the state. We were looking at stuff with vaccine hesitancy among parents of children. And so she had a summer project where she gathered data that helped us, and is actually part of a paper we're writing and such, about looking at kind of a triangulation on vaccine hesitancy among some certain populations. And she was working with that county extension agent who opened a lot of doors for her. So that might be something else. And those internship, or those summer internships, it was with a graduate student who did it for us. And CSU pays their way. It's you go for that pot of money. So that might be something in the future once we've identified some of these places.
Okay, that's great. Karia, can I ask you, you mentioned that some of the, maybe I got this wrong, but you mentioned that some of the organizations sought CSU students for engagement. Can you tell me a little more about that?
Yeah, so some of the clubs that I'm a part of, previous members stayed in Fort Collins and they work for these organizations. So they kind of target student populations that don't have work authorization. So they'll invite them to volunteer and pay them in gift cards. And that's kind of how word gets around. And that's what I mean, like they target CSU populations, but that's all I know.
Okay. I'm just thinking, Taylor, I think this is something to address in our privacy. Is there any way that we want to keep people's information private, but is there any way that we could be forced to disclose their address if we, I don't think so, but I would want everyone to be protected. So we'll follow up on that.
Yep, we'll do.
So people who have not had a chance to speak, Jordan, Whitney, Misa, Carson, is there anything you've thought of that you haven't had a chance to say?
I don't know what I don't know, but the first thing that I thought of was, regardless of where it kind of got covered a little bit in like the county services thing, but like if TANF households would be eligible or would be interested in having that service, if there's a way of kind of working with the organizations giving those services, that might be a good conduit.
So what services did you say? Sorry.
Like TANF, I believe TANF covers, it like provides stipends for utilities for lower income households. And I think it's usually at the municipality level.
Okay.
I think it stands for Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, if I remember. TANF.
Okay.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
So, like in my case, I had mentioned that before. I used to do a lot of like free health screenings for vulnerable populations across southern Arizona. So my team primarily, everyone that was on there was a bilingual speaker. And there was a reason for that. It was because a lot of these populations aren't really comfortable, or native like English speakers. So it was kind of like a way to kind of connect with them on a deeper level. And the way that we were able to access a lot of places across southern Arizona was through governmental agencies, from different counties, which is how we were able to set up vaccination events, free health screening events. So we would go to food banks and set up there because that targets a lot of like lower income populations. So I think, and the thing that I think is cool is that a lot of these organizations are all connected because everyone kind of wants to help each other within this world. So I think just kind of getting a leeway into this would lead to other connections in other places of Colorado as well, if they have those programs as Arizona had. I'm not sure if they do, but I'm just speaking from that experience.
Misa, based on your experience with the people who came to your events, is there a mistrust, as a sort of whether it's university or technology or I don't know, are there things that we would need to overcome or that we should give attention to now, before we start proposing to go drill holes in their homes?
I think there's a lot of skepticism, just because sometimes people aren't fully aware of what's going on, again, because of the language barrier, at least like Latino populations. So I think it is important for them to be able to communicate well and what's actually going on and what they're getting themselves involved in. Because if not, if anything looks gray or if anything just seems off, but it just might be that they don't understand it that well. I think that's a big issue. And then a lot of the events that we did a lot of promotion before we even went to the events. And then from there, it kind of spread through word of mouth because a lot of people tend to tell familiars within this community that this is being offered. So I think just as long as like we kind of get our foot in the door there, I think we'll get a ball rolling, if anything.
Yeah, that's why I want to start. I think it's going to take us months to find the right place. And I think we'll have, we should be pursuing multiple leads at the same time, just to see what will work the best and expect things to fall through. Yeah, so I'd again love to hear more from you about your experience, what helps people overcome skepticism. This gets a little bit perhaps to the discussion I want to have next week, where it's come up from weatherization agencies that they would like to hear more about the project. They'll help us deliver the survey, but they want to hear what we're doing. And so that kind of communication might be a step toward being able to communicate with people. And I realize that there's a big bridge between a weatherization agency and someone who lives in a home who may be less comfortable speaking English. but we should probably think about how we're going to step in that direction. These are all super useful ideas. So I think some of the actions we have to take are this sort of triangulation between the right place and how then to build connections or rely on connections in those places. That's going to take a while. So I'm going to ask Taylor to help me manage that selection. But I encourage all of you to just throw out ideas, no matter how crazy, right? The inclusion thing, I think, has obviously been quite difficult for us as a society. And then even when people want to do better, sometimes it's difficult for them to figure out exactly how. So we need to, I think we need to take it on deliberately, right? And as Christian says, yes, we got to do what we said we were going to do, but let's try our darndest to do it in a way that brings people in and that benefits people and that we can be sure will be a benefit rather than a hope.
I was just looking at some of the San Luis Valley ones. Real course analysis over 2 years looked like maybe 70 adverse air events ish, 70, 80. So looks like maybe a promising area.
Yeah. I mean, I feel bad for them now. 70. That's kind of a lot.
I think a lot of it's dust because it's super arid. So they have these like dust storm pieces that even separate from forest fires. So they have these seasonal ones as well.
I haven't thought of dust as a possible stressor, but it's maybe we should consider that too. Interesting.
It's
Got
more
these
predictable
things
in a lot of areas,
Yeah.
at least.
Yeah.
Does
Sorry.
any part of Colorado do ag burns? I mean, that's another. I think of Kansas when I think of that. You know, there's parts of Kansas that routinely burn still, and there's been some studies looking at that. But that might be another source of a routine. It's I mean, you know when it's going to happen, seasonal, but it would be reliable.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do decide to pursue dust, I know John Volkins is starting up a project on dust exposure, and I believe it was in the San Luis Valley. It was in southern Colorado, so he may have some contacts.
Is that the same one?
Yeah,
Okay.
Sorry, Chris,
that's the same data I just pulled up.
that makes sense.
Okay. Okay, so that's an interesting thing, and it would, we had been targeting winter conditions because then we would get inversions and smoke at the same time. But so dust would put us in a different arena, but okay, cool. Oh, thank you, Whitney.
There's maybe
right.
a little bit of useful info in there. I don't know if there's a lot, but it is there.
Okay. Okay, well, yeah, thank you everyone for helping with the brainstorming. Yeah, I hope we find a great place, and I hope we're able to do good things for people. So anything else before I close for the day? Okay, thank you all so much for your thoughts. And have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tammy.
Thanks.
Bye.
Yeah.